is he?
Well, same old Ethan.
Mission: Impossible Fallout, 2018, a complete analysis. Introduction. This analysis provides a comprehensive examination of Mission: Impossible Fallout, the sixth installment in the long-running spy action franchise. Released in 2018 and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, the film made history as the first in the series to feature a returning director, following his successful work on Rogue Nation. With Tom Cruise reprising his iconic role as Ethan Hunt, the film represents a pinnacle of action cinema, blending practical stunts with surprising emotional depth. This analysis will explore the film's narrative structure, thematic concerns, character arcs, technical achievements, and its lasting impact on the franchise and the action genre as a whole. Narrative context and setup. The film opens 2 years after the events of Rogue Nation, establishing that the terrorist syndicate known as the Syndicate has reformed under a new name, the Apostles. This group now operates as a terror-for-hire organization, working for an extremist known only as John Lark. The central MacGuffin is established immediately: 3 plutonium cores that the Apostles have acquired to construct portable nuclear bombs. The opening mission in Berlin serves as the inciting incident, forcing Ethan Hunt to make an impossible choice between saving his teammate Luther Stickle or recovering the stolen plutonium. His decision to save Luther allows the Apostles to escape with the cores, creating the narrative fallout that drives the entire film. The MacGuffin as narrative driver. The 3 plutonium cores function as a classic MacGuffin, an object that propels the plot forward but whose specific nature is less important than what it represents within the story. In this film, the cores symbolize Ethan's failure and the price of his humanity. Every subsequent action in the narrative is driven by the need to recover these cores, but more importantly, the cores represent the consequences of Ethan's moral choices. The film asks whether his insistence on saving every life, even at the cost of mission failure, is a strength or a weakness that can be exploited by his enemies. Act 1, the fallout begins. The first act establishes the central conflict and introduces the new dynamics that will challenge Ethan throughout the film. Following the Berlin failure, CIA Director Erica Sloan forces the IMF to accept a handler, August Walker, portrayed by Henry Cavill. Walker is introduced as a ruthless CIA assassin who operates without moral constraints, serving as a direct foil to Ethan's principles. The team traces the plutonium to Paris, where they must intercept a transaction between John Lark and the enigmatic arms broker Alana Mitsopoulos, known as the White Widow. This act culminates in the now iconic Halo jump sequence, which establishes the film's commitment to practical, death-defying stunts. The Halo jump sequence. The high-altitude, low-opening jump over Paris represents a landmark achievement in practical filmmaking. Tom Cruise and Henry Cavill performed over 100 skydives to capture the sequence, which was the first Halo jump ever filmed for cinema. The scene was shot during actual thunderstorms, with real lightning strikes visible in the final footage. This sequence serves multiple purposes. It establishes the film's technical ambitions, introduces the uneasy alliance between Ethan and Walker, and creates a visceral sense of danger that CGI cannot replicate. The audience understands that they are watching real people performing real feats, grounding the fantastical spy narrative in physical reality. Act 2, The Unraveling. The second act of the film pivots on a series of revelations that complicate the narrative and deepen the character conflicts. The man believed to be John Lark is killed by Ilsa Faust, Rebecca Ferguson's character from Rogue Nation, who re-enters the story with her own objectives. Ethan assumes Lark's identity and agrees to extract the captured Solomon Lane from police custody in exchange for the remaining plutonium cores. The Paris motorcycle chase sequence represents the film's relentless pacing, with Ethan weaving through traffic at the Arc de Triomphe roundabout. However, the narrative complexity deepens when Walker provides evidence to CIA Director Sloan, suggesting that Ethan himself is the real John Lark. The Paris chase and its significance. The motorcycle chase through the streets of Paris, particularly the sequence at the Arc de Triomphe roundabout, demonstrates director Christopher McQuarrie's mastery of spatial geography in action filmmaking. French critics noted the audacity of filming crews going against traffic on a roundabout that is notoriously chaotic even when drivers follow the correct direction. This sequence represents the film's approach to action. Set pieces are not merely inserted for spectacle, but emerge organically from the narrative situation. The chase serves as a pressure cooker that tests the alliance between Ethan and Walker while advancing the plot toward the next revelation, the Solomon Lane extraction. The sequence involving Solomon Lane's extraction from police custody represents one of the film's most complex narrative set pieces. Lane, portrayed by Sean Harris, returns as the intellectual antagonist who poses a philosophical challenge to Ethan rather than merely a physical one. Critics have compared Lane to Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber in Die Hard, noting his rare complexity for an action film villain. The extraction sequence showcases the team's operational expertise, while also advancing the film's exploration of Ethan's moral code. The plan requires Ethan to betray his principles by releasing a terrorist, creating internal conflict that drives his character arc. Act 3, Betrayal and Resolution. The third act begins in London, where the IMF team orchestrates an elaborate deception to expose August Walker as the true John Lark. The sequence features a mask reveal, a franchise staple, but subverts expectations by revealing that the deception was not intended to fool Walker, but rather to prove his identity to the CIA. Walker responds by killing IMF Secretary Alan Hunley and escaping with Solomon Lane to Kashmir, where they threaten Ethan's ex-wife Julia. The final act unfolds at a medical camp near the Siachen Glacier, where the apostles plan to detonate their remaining nuclear bombs, contaminating water supplies for billions across India, Pakistan, and China. The helicopter chase and dogfight. The final act's helicopter sequence represents the film's technical peak and Tom Cruise's most ambitious stunt work to date. Cruise learned to fly helicopters specifically for the production and performed the following: flying through mountain valleys, executing aerial combat maneuvers, and coordinating a crash sequence that required precise timing and execution. Critics noted that while some CGI was used in the sequence, the practical foundation makes it difficult to distinguish digital enhancements from real footage. The helicopter chase transforms the action from ground-based pursuit into three-dimensional aerial combat, expanding the film's visual vocabulary while maintaining the visceral immediacy established in earlier sequences. The cliffside confrontation. The film's physical climax occurs on a cliff edge overlooking the Kashmir landscape, where Ethan Hunt finally defeats August Walker in brutal hand-to-hand combat. This confrontation represents the culmination of the ideological conflict established throughout the film. Walker's ruthless pragmatism versus Ethan's principled humanity. The setting is significant, placing the characters at the literal edge of civilization, far from the urban environments that typically host action climaxes. The fight choreography emphasizes realism over stylization, with exhausted, wounded combatants rather than invincible action heroes. Walker's death, hanging from a snapped rope after refusing Ethan's offer of help, provides thematic closure to their conflict. The meaning of fallout. The film's title operates on multiple levels, adding depth to what might otherwise be dismissed as generic action movie terminology. There is literal fallout in the form of nuclear bombs and radioactive contamination, representing the stakes of the mission. There is emotional fallout from Ethan's past choices, particularly regarding his marriage to Julia and his decision to prioritize Luther's life over mission success in Berlin. There is narrative fallout from previous films, as characters and consequences from Rogue Nation and even Mission Impossible 3 return to shape the story. This multiplicity of meaning demonstrates the film's commitment to thematic complexity within the action genre. Ethan Hunt's humanity. The film's most significant thematic achievement is its exploration of Ethan Hunt as a human being rather than merely an action hero. For the first time in the series, Ethan's motivations and methods are explicitly questioned by other characters, particularly August Walker and CIA Director Sloan. The film opens with a nightmare sequence showing Ethan's wedding to Julia interrupted by Solomon Lane, revealing the psychological cost of his double life. Throughout the narrative, Ethan's choices are driven not by abstract duty, but by personal loyalty. Critics noted that this emphasis on humanity represents the greatest homage the film pays to the complete saga, acknowledging how often Ethan has endangered himself and the world to save those he loves. The Julia arc, closure after 12 years. Michelle Monaghan's return as Julia provides emotional closure to a storyline that began in Mission Impossible 3. Tom Cruise was particularly interested in resolving the long-running narrative between Ethan and his wife, and fans had frequently asked about Julia's fate over the intervening years. The film's emotional climax occurs not in the helicopter battle, but in a quiet moment when Ethan apologizes to Julia for the danger he brought into her life. Her response, that he gave her a life worth living, represents the franchise's most mature and emotionally resonant scene. This moment transforms the film from a pure action spectacle into something unexpectedly moving. The team dynamic. Unlike previous installments where supporting characters often felt expendable, this film emphasizes the IMF team as a family unit. Luther Stickle, portrayed by Ving Rhames, receives much more importance than in previous entries, fitting for the only character besides Ethan to appear in all 6 films. Benji Dunn, played by Simon Pegg, evolves from comic relief to a competent field agent with moments of genuine heroism. This emphasis on the team dynamic reinforces the film's thematic concern with human connection and loyalty. The mission matters not because of abstract stakes, but because of what it means for these specific characters who have grown together over the course of the franchise. Ethan Hunt, character analysis. At 56 during filming, Tom Cruise delivered what many consider his definitive performance as Ethan Hunt. His commitment to practical stunts, including flying helicopters, halo jumping, and breaking his ankle during a rooftop leap, created a visceral realism that CGI cannot replicate. Critics noted that Cruise's willingness to perform dangerous stunts at his age added an extra layer of tension to the action sequences. The broken ankle incident, captured on film and included in the final cut, became emblematic of Cruise's dedication to his craft and to the character he has portrayed for more than 2 decades. August Walker, character analysis. Henry Cavill's portrayal of August Walker introduced a new archetype to the franchise. The physically imposing antagonist who matches Ethan in capability but lacks his moral constraints. Critics praised Cavill's performance, noting that the intimidating presence of Walker was captured through counterplunge camera angles that magnify the character's physical stature. Walker's most memorable moment, the reloading arms gesture before the bathroom fight, became an instant meme and cultural touchstone, demonstrating how small character details can create iconic moments that resonate far beyond the film itself. Ilsa Faust, character analysis. Rebecca Ferguson's Ilsa Faust returns as Ethan's equal in skill and moral complexity. Unlike many female action characters who serve primarily as love interests, Ilsa maintains her own agency and objectives throughout the narrative. Critics noted that she was written with greater depth this time, and that her relationship with Ethan was deepened from the previous installment. However, some French critics expressed disappointment that Ilsa was somewhat sidelined compared to Rogue Nation, suggesting the film's focus on showcasing crews came at the expense of developing supporting characters. This tension reflects broader debates about the franchise's direction. Solomon Lane, character analysis. Sean Harris's Solomon Lane represents a new kind of mission. Impossible villain, quiet, intellectual, and genuinely menacing without relying on grand speeches or physical intimidation. Critics noted that Lane possessed a rare complexity for action film antagonists, making him a worthy adversary for Ethan on an ideological rather than merely physical level. However, some reviews noted that Lane could have used more screen time, as the narrative ultimately pivots toward Walker as the primary antagonist in the final act. This shift, while dramatically effective, left Lane's philosophical challenge somewhat underexplored. The White Widow, character analysis. Vanessa Kirby's Alana Mitsopoulos, known as the White Widow, provides a meaningful connection to franchise history as the daughter of Max from the original 1996 film. Her performance as a coolly manipulative arms broker was widely praised, with critics noting she deserved significantly more screen time than she received. The character operates in the moral gray area that the franchise increasingly explores, neither fully ally nor enemy to Ethan. This ambiguity adds texture to the narrative, creating unpredictable dynamics that keep audiences engaged beyond the action sequences. The bathroom fight sequence. The bathroom fight scene in Paris has been widely praised as one of the greatest action sequences in modern cinema. Several critics noted that this single sequence alone was worth the price of admission. The scene features brutal, visceral choreography that emphasizes realism over stylized martial arts. The claustrophobic framing maximizes tension, confining the characters in a small space that forces intimate, desperate violence. Cavill's reloading arms gesture before re-engaging the enemy became an iconic moment that transcended the film, demonstrating how precise directorial choices can elevate action choreography into cultural touchstones. Practical effects philosophy. The film's dedication to practical effects distinguishes it from CGI-heavy blockbusters that dominated the late 2010s. As one reviewer noted, the action received more dramatic layers without plummeting into melodrama or cliché precisely because the physical reality of the stunts grounds the fantasy in tangible stakes. This philosophy extends beyond the major set pieces to every action moment in the film. Car crashes are real cars colliding, punches connect with actual impact, and characters exhaust themselves in ways that digital creations cannot convincingly replicate. This commitment creates an authenticity that has become increasingly rare in franchise filmmaking. Christopher McQuarrie's directorial vision. McQuarrie's return as director marked a first for the franchise, as all previous entries had different directors. This continuity allowed for consistent character development across installments and thematic unity that rewards long-term viewers. McQuarrie initially hesitated to return, finding Rogue Nation difficult to film, but Tom Cruise personally convinced him, recognizing the value of creative continuity. The result is a film that benefits from a director who understands not only the technical demands of the franchise, but also its emotional history and character relationships. The 33-page script. One of the film's most unusual production aspects was its 33-page script, significantly shorter than typical screenplays. This brevity was intentional, allowing the script to serve as an outline driven primarily by interesting filming locations and allowing for improvisation and significant changes to scenes throughout production. This approach explains the film's fluid, improvisational feel, where scenes could evolve based on location discoveries or Cruise's stunt capabilities. The unconventional methodology represents a unique approach to blockbuster filmmaking, prioritizing flexibility and discovery over rigid adherence to pre-planned material. Visual language and cinematography. Cinematographer Rob Hardy brought a distinctive visual style to the film, characterized by restless camera movement that never disorients, counterplunge angles that emphasize character stature, long takes that showcase stunt work, and nighttime photography that makes Paris feel both glamorous and dangerous. This visual language serves the narrative rather than calling attention to itself, creating an immersive experience that draws audiences into the world of the film. Hardy's work demonstrates that action cinema can be both technically accomplished and artistically sophisticated. Critical reception overview. Upon release, the film achieved a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes from early reviews, eventually settling at 97%. The The site's consensus praised the action sequences and Cruise's performance. Critics across the spectrum noted that the film represented a high point not only for the franchise, but for action cinema more broadly. Many reviews specifically highlighted the film's ability to balance spectacular action with genuine emotional stakes, a combination that has proven elusive in much of contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. Positive critical responses. Eric Davis of Fandango wrote that the film was absolutely fantastic, entertaining audiences in every way with incredible action sequences, nail-biting suspense, and the series' best finale yet. Stephen Weintraub of Collider reported that the film was loaded with insane action and edge-of-your-seat moments. Scott Menzel of We Live Entertainment noted that the film confirmed that lightning could strike twice, and that it would be nearly impossible for any other action film that year to top it. Critic Fernando Schiavi concluded that technically and emotionally, the film wins in a historic process, representing action cinema's first major representative in an era when the genre was gaining increasing cultural space. Critical perspectives and reservations. The BBC's Nicholas Barber offered a more measured assessment, awarding 3 out of 5 stars. While acknowledging the technical achievement, he questioned whether the action sequences truly served the story, arguing that even a miraculous helicopter dogfight cannot get the blood pumping if its tone is inconsistent. Barber also critiqued Ethan Hunt's invincibility, noting it was hard to warm to this invincible robot as much as one might warm to James Bond or Jason Bourne. Keith Ulick of Slant Magazine gave the sole truly negative review, arguing the film was overwrought and primarily designed to showcase Cruise's ego. French critical reception. French critics largely embraced the film while noting its flaws. Cinesri concluded that while the film could be considered the best action film of the year, it unfortunately prioritized action too much to the detriment of a sufficiently gripping story. Siribox users praised the technical achievements including music, fight choreography, cinematography, and shot composition, while noting that the scenario was less successful, particularly in the first part with a sluggish start and surprises that were not genuinely surprising. These responses reflect the tension between appreciating technical virtuosity while desiring narrative sophistication. Box office achievement. With $791.1 million worldwide, the film became the highest-grossing Mission Impossible installment and the 8th highest-grossing film of 2018. This represented a significant increase over Rogue Nation's $682 million gross. The box office success demonstrated that a franchise in its 6th installment could not only maintain audience interest, but actually grow its commercial appeal. This achievement was particularly notable given the film's nearly 2.5-hour runtime and its commitment to practical filmmaking in an era dominated by CGI spectacle, setting the stage for sequels. The film was followed by 2 sequels, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 in 2023 and Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning in 2025. The success of this installment established the template for these subsequent films, continuing the emphasis on practical stunts, emotional continuity, and returning creative personnel. The film's resolution of the Julia storyline allowed the franchise to move forward with a clean emotional slate, while the introduction of new characters and dynamics provided material for future installments to explore. Why the film matters. This film represents a turning point for action cinema in an era dominated by CGI spectacle. It demonstrated that practical effects, real stunts, and genuine physical risk could still captivate audiences and achieve commercial success. The film extrapolates and raises to the maximum everything that had been shown in the franchise to that point, representing the culmination of techniques and approaches developed over the previous 5 films. It proved that a franchise could not only maintain quality across multiple installments, but actually improve with each entry, a rare achievement in Hollywood history. Criticism. Predictable twist villain. Several reviewers noted that Walker's identity as John Lark was telegraphed too obviously, with the betrayal easily guessed well before the film's reveal. Some critics noted that the villain was technically a generic twist villain, following patterns established in countless earlier action films. While Cavill's performance elevated the material, the structural predictability of the narrative weakened the impact of what might otherwise have been a more shocking revelation. This criticism suggests that the film's focus on technical achievement came at some expense to narrative innovation. Criticism. Pacing issues in the first act. Some critics felt the film's opening was very sluggish before finding its rhythm in the Paris sequences. At 147 minutes, the runtime was considered excessive by some reviewers who suggested the film could have benefited from being shortened by 30 minutes. The first act's focus on establishing the plot mechanics and character conflicts, while necessary, lacked the kinetic energy that would define the film's later sequences. This pacing issue was noted across multiple reviews, representing one of the few consistent criticisms of the film. Criticism: underutilized characters. The White Widow and Solomon Lane received less screen time than audiences and critics hoped, with Vanessa Kirby's performance particularly noted as deserving more development. Ilsa Faust's role was reduced compared to Rogue Nation, disappointing viewers who had responded to the character in the previous film. This underutilization reflects a broader tension in franchise filmmaking between showcasing the star and developing supporting characters. While Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt remains the central focus, the film occasionally sacrifices potentially interesting supporting characters in service of that focus. Criticism: suspension of disbelief. Ethan Hunt's near invincibility, surviving crashes and falls that would kill any normal human, strained credibility for some viewers. As the BBC noted, this invulnerability cannot help but make the film less involving, as audiences come to understand that the protagonist will survive any physical challenge regardless of how dangerous it appears. This criticism touches on a fundamental challenge of action cinema: balancing spectacular stunts with credible stakes. While the film's practical approach creates genuine risk for the performers, that risk does not translate into genuine narrative uncertainty about Ethan's survival. The franchise legacy. This film stands as the apex of its franchise and a landmark achievement in action cinema. Its synthesis of practical stunts, emotional depth, and technical virtuosity creates an experience that transcends the spy genre's conventions. The film succeeds where many blockbusters fail by grounding spectacle in character, ensuring that Ethan Hunt's impossible missions matter not because of their scale, but because of what is at stake: the people he loves. By resolving the Julia storyline after 12 years and exploring the psychological cost of Ethan's choices, the film transformed a stunt-driven franchise into something unexpectedly moving. Conclusion: while critics noted narrative predictability and excessive runtime, these concerns were largely overshadowed by the film's achievements in action choreography, cinematography, and Tom Cruise's legendary commitment to practical effects. In an era where audiences increasingly question the purpose of franchise filmmaking, this film provides a compelling answer. Excellence, authenticity, and genuine emotional stakes remain worth pursuing. As one critic concluded, it is not an exaggeration to characterize the feature film as one of the most energetic American action productions of recent years. The film represents not only the peak of its own franchise, but a standard against which future action cinema will be measured. The film's opening nightmare sequence, showing Ethan's wedding to Julia disrupted by Solomon Lane, establishes immediately that this installment will delve into psychological territory rarely explored in the franchise, revealing that the super spy's confidence masks deep trauma from the life he has to abandon. This dream functions as a thematic overture, announcing that the film will concern itself not with Ethan's physical capabilities, which have been thoroughly documented across 5 previous films, but with the emotional cost of his choices and the weight of the lives he has been unable to save. The decision to begin with such an intimate, vulnerable moment signals Christopher McQuarrie's intention to deconstruct the Ethan Hunt mythos, presenting the character not as an invincible operative, but as a man haunted by his past. This psychological framing pays off throughout the narrative, as Ethan's decisions are consistently driven by the fear of causing harm to those he loves, a fear born from the trauma of losing Julia and the constant threat to his team. The nightmare also serves to reintroduce the character of Solomon Lane as more than a physical antagonist, positioning him as the embodiment of the chaos that Ethan's double life brings into his personal relationships. By beginning with this dream, the film immediately communicates that the stakes are not merely nuclear annihilation, but the very soul of its protagonist, making the action sequences that follow resonate with emotional significance. This approach represents a maturation of the franchise, which in earlier installments often treated Ethan's personal life as a secondary concern rather than the central motivating force of the narrative. The nightmare sequence also functions as a bridge for longtime viewers, connecting the events of Mission Impossible 3 to the current narrative and rewarding audience investment in the series' continuity. For newer viewers, The sequence provides sufficient context to understand the depth of Ethan's commitment to Julia and the pain associated with their separation. The visual language of The Nightmare, with its fragmented editing and surreal lighting, contrasts sharply with the crisp, clear cinematography of the film's waking sequences, creating a clear distinction between Ethan's internal turmoil and his external competence. This contrast reinforces the film's central tension: the gap between how Ethan appears to the world and the psychological burden he carries internally. The Nightmare also establishes Solomon Lane's role as a psychological tormentor rather than merely a physical threat, a characterization that Sean Harris develops throughout his scenes with a quiet, menacing intensity, by making Ethan's psychology the foundation of the narrative. The film elevates itself above typical action fare, demonstrating that franchise filmmaking can engage with complex emotional material without sacrificing spectacular entertainment. This opening choice ultimately pays dividends in the film's later quiet moments, particularly the climactic conversation with Julia, where the emotional groundwork laid here allows for genuine catharsis rather than feeling like an obligatory character beat. The character of August Walker represents a deliberate inversion of the franchise's traditional ally archetype, presenting a figure who matches Ethan's capabilities but operates according to a fundamentally different moral calculus that prioritizes mission success over human life. Henry Cavill's casting as Walker was a calculated choice, utilizing the actor's established screen presence as a heroic figure to create audience uncertainty about Walker's true allegiances throughout the film's first half. The physical contrast between Cruise and Cavill is deployed strategically throughout the film, with Walker's greater size and apparent strength creating a constant visual tension that suggests he could overpower Ethan if their alliance were to dissolve. Walker's introduction at the CIA briefing, where he stands in stark contrast to the IMF team's more casual demeanor, immediately establishes him as an outsider whose methods will conflict with Ethan's established approach. The character's background as a CIA assassin operating in black sites is revealed through subtle dialogue rather than explicit exposition, allowing audiences to understand his worldview without requiring lengthy backstory sequences. Walker's most defining characteristic, his complete lack of moral hesitation, is demonstrated rather than explained through his actions, particularly his willingness to kill the man believed to be John Lark without attempting to extract intelligence. This willingness to eliminate rather than capture represents the fundamental philosophical divide between Walker and Ethan, a divide that the film explores through their increasingly strained partnership. The famous bathroom fight sequence serves as the crucible for this relationship, forcing the two men to fight side by side while revealing Walker's enjoyment of violence that Ethan finds disturbing. Cavill's performance subtly shifts after the film's midpoint, with Walker's charming professionalism giving way to a more sinister confidence as his true nature becomes apparent to the audience. The character's ultimate revelation as John Lark recontextualizes his earlier actions, transforming what seemed like professional disagreements into deliberate attempts to sabotage Ethan's mission and discredit him within the intelligence community. Walker's physical confrontations with Ethan are choreographed differently from any previous antagonist in the franchise, emphasizing raw power over the precise, technical fighting style that Ethan typically employs. This physical contrast reinforces the thematic opposition between the characters, with Walker representing brute force and expediency, while Ethan embodies precision and principle. The character's death, hanging from a snapped rope after refusing Ethan's offer of assistance, provides a final statement on his worldview: a refusal to compromise or accept help, choosing death over the vulnerability of trust. The film's treatment of Ilsa Faust reflects the franchise's ongoing evolution in its portrayal of female characters, moving beyond the damsel-in-distress archetype of earlier installments toward complex agents with their own motivations and agency. Rebecca Ferguson's performance builds upon her work in Rogue Nation, deepening Ilsa's character by revealing the cost of her previous decisions and the complicated loyalty she feels toward both MI6 and her personal connection to Ethan. Ilsa's reappearance in Paris is carefully staged to establish her as an equal participant in the narrative rather than a supporting character who exists primarily to assist Ethan's objectives. Her decision to kill the man believed to be John Lark creates immediate narrative complexity, forcing Ethan to assume Lark's identity and placing Ilsa in a morally ambiguous position relative to the mission. The film explores Ilsa's relationship with Solomon Lane, suggesting a shared history that complicates her involvement in the extraction sequence and adds layers to her motivation beyond simple allegiance to British intelligence. Ilsa's combat sequences are choreographed to emphasize her technical proficiency rather than relying on the audience's acceptance of a physically smaller woman defeating larger opponents through improbable means. This commitment to realistic action extends to Ilsa's limitations, as she is shown struggling against opponents and requiring assistance at key moments, making her victories feel earned rather than automatic. The character's wardrobe and presentation similarly avoid the sexualization that characterized earlier female characters in the franchise, with Ilsa dressed for practicality and functionality rather than visual appeal. Her interactions with Ethan are characterized by mutual respect and shared history rather than romantic tension, allowing their relationship to develop along professional and emotional lines that feel authentic to their circumstances. Some critics noted that Ilsa's role was reduced compared to Rogue Nation, suggesting that the film's focus on introducing new characters came at the expense of developing existing relationships. However, the scenes Ilsa does have carry significant narrative weight, particularly her confrontation with Walker and her involvement in the film's final act. The character's survival through the film's events positions her for continued involvement in subsequent installments, acknowledging audience investment in her relationship with Ethan and the IMF team. Ilsa's presence also serves to complicate the film's gender dynamics, providing a counterpoint to the male-dominated action sequences and offering a perspective that challenges the toxic masculinity embodied by August Walker. Her loyalty to Ethan is tested throughout the film, creating dramatic tension that pays off in the final act when she chooses to assist the IMF team despite the personal cost to her standing with MI6. The character of Solomon Lane, as portrayed by Sean Harris, represents a significant departure from the franchise's earlier villains, who typically relied on grand pronouncements and elaborate schemes to establish their menace. Lane's introduction in this film, following his capture at the end of Rogue Nation, immediately subverts expectations by presenting the villain as physically diminished, restrained, and dependent on his followers for survival rather than commanding from a position of strength. This vulnerability paradoxically makes Lane more threatening, as his continued influence over the apostles despite his imprisonment demonstrates the power of his ideology over mere physical capability. Harris's vocal performance is crucial to the character's effectiveness, utilizing a whispery, measured delivery that forces audiences to lean in and engage with his words rather than being overwhelmed by bombast. Lane's philosophical arguments against Ethan's worldview are presented with a twisted logic that challenges the protagonist's certainty, suggesting that Ethan's refusal to make hard choices has created more suffering than his enemies ever have. The character's physical deterioration during his imprisonment serves as a visual representation of his ideological purity, suggesting that his commitment to his cause transcends personal comfort or even survival. Lane's interactions with August Walker reveal a pragmatic alliance between two fundamentally different types of villains, with Lane providing ideological direction while Walker executes with brutal efficiency. The extraction sequence, which requires Ethan to pose as Lane's ally, creates uncomfortable dramatic irony as audiences witness Lane treated with dignity and respect despite his monstrous actions. Lane's manipulation of the White Widow and her organization demonstrates his continued operational capability even from within custody, suggesting that his capture was perhaps less significant than the IMF believed. The character's escape at the film's midpoint allows the narrative to shift toward the final confrontation while maintaining Lane as a background threat whose influence continues to shape events. Some critics noted that Lane deserved more screen time, suggesting that his philosophical challenge to Ethan could have been explored more deeply if the narrative had devoted additional attention to their dynamic. However, the film's decision to make Walker the primary antagonist in the final act allows Lane's intellectual menace to remain distinct from the physical threat, preventing the villain roles from becoming redundant. Lane's ultimate fate, left ambiguous by the film's conclusion, provides potential narrative threads for future installments while offering sufficient closure for this particular story. The character's legacy within the franchise is significant, establishing a template for villains who challenge Ethan intellectually rather than merely physically, a pattern that subsequent films have continued to explore. The White Widow, portrayed by Vanessa Kirby, provides a crucial narrative function as the intermediary who connects Ethan's team to the criminal underworld, but her significance extends far beyond this plot mechanism through her connection to the franchise's history. As the daughter of Max, the arms dealer from the original Mission Impossible film, Alana Mitsopoulos represents continuity with the series' beginnings, rewarding long-term viewers who recognize the significance of her parentage. Kirby's performance balances aristocratic poise with ruthless pragmatism, creating a character who operates entirely in moral gray areas while maintaining a personal code that Ethan must learn to navigate. The White Widow's operation at the Paris nightclub, where she conducts business amidst lavish parties, establishes her as a figure who has transcended her mother's more furtive criminal operations to achieve legitimate social standing. Her initial demand for Solomon Lane's freedom in exchange for the plutonium cores creates an impossible ethical dilemma for Ethan, forcing him to weigh the consequences of releasing a terrorist against the certainty of nuclear detonation. The character's relationship with her brother, Zola, adds emotional depth to what might otherwise be a purely transactional figure, revealing that her criminal empire is built upon family loyalty as much as financial ambition. Alana's reaction to her brother's death at the hands of the Apostles transforms her character from a neutral broker into an active participant in the film's climax, demonstrating that her cool exterior masks genuine emotional investment. The film's use of the White Widow also serves to expand the franchise's world building, suggesting a complex ecosystem of criminal organizations that operate parallel to the intelligence agencies that typically dominate the narrative. Kirby's performance received widespread praise from critics, many of whom noted that the character deserved significantly more screen time than the film ultimately provided. The White Widow's survival through the film's events positions her for continued appearances in the franchise, offering a recurring character who can provide the IMF team with access to criminal networks in future installments. Her interactions with Ilsa Faust create interesting dynamics between female characters that exist outside the traditional romantic or competitive frameworks that often define such relationships in action cinema. The character's moral ambiguity serves as a foil to Ethan's rigid principles, demonstrating that effectiveness in the world of espionage often requires compromise that Ethan is unwilling to make. Alana's eventual decision to assist the IMF team, motivated by personal revenge rather than altruism, reinforces the film's thematic exploration of human motivation and the various forms that loyalty can take. The White Widow's place within the franchise's mythology, connected to the original film while existing firmly in the present, exemplifies the series' ability to honor its history without becoming trapped by nostalgia. The Halo jump sequence represents not merely a technical achievement, but a narrative device that encapsulates the film's central themes of trust, risk, and the consequences of impossible choices. The decision to film the sequence practically, with Cruise and Cavill performing actual skydives during twilight conditions, established from the film's first major set piece that audiences would be witnessing genuine human achievement rather than computer-generated spectacle. The sequence's structure, showing Ethan and Walker falling through a lightning storm while attempting to intercept the White Widow's courier, creates a metaphor for the characters' relationship. Two men hurtling toward an uncertain outcome, dependent on each other while fundamentally opposed in their approaches. Cruise's insistence on performing the jump himself, despite the significant risks involved in night skydiving through storm conditions, communicates his commitment to the franchise in a way that no interview or promotional appearance could achieve. The sequence's technical complexity required over 100 jumps to capture the necessary footage, representing weeks of work compressed into minutes of screen time that audiences experience as a single, seamless descent. The use of real lightning strikes visible in the background of the sequence adds an element of uncontrollable danger that even the most sophisticated CGI cannot replicate, grounding the fantastic premise in genuine physical risk. The sequence's climax, where Ethan must revive Walker after his oxygen supply fails, establishes the dynamic that will define their relationship throughout the film. Ethan sacrificing his own safety to preserve a man who may ultimately betray him. This moment of rescue becomes thematically significant when contrasted with Walker's later refusal to help Ethan, demonstrating the fundamental difference in their characters through action rather than dialogue. The Halo sequence also serves the practical narrative purpose of establishing Ethan's physical capabilities and the film's willingness to place him in genuinely dangerous situations, setting audience expectations for the challenges to come. The sequence's location, with the descent ending in Paris, allows for a seamless transition from aerial spectacle to ground-level action, maintaining momentum across the film's first act. The technical achievement of capturing a Halo jump on film, something never before accomplished in cinema, gave the film a unique selling point that distinguished it from other action releases in a crowded summer season. Critics consistently cited the sequence as one of the film's most memorable moments, with many noting that the tension created by the practical execution exceeded anything achievable through digital means. The sequence's success also established a benchmark for subsequent films in the franchise, raising audience expectations for practical stunts that would need to be exceeded in future installments. For the production team, the Halo jump represented the culmination of years of planning and training, demonstrating the level of commitment required to continue pushing the franchise forward after 5 previous films. The Paris motorcycle chase sequence, particularly the section filmed at the Arc de Triomphe roundabout, exemplifies the film's approach to action as the intersection of meticulous planning and controlled chaos. The decision to film on location in Paris, rather than constructing a studio replica, required extraordinary coordination with city authorities and presented logistical challenges that would have been avoided by any production less committed to authenticity. The Arc de Triomphe roundabout, notorious among Parisians for its chaotic traffic patterns and absence of clear lane markings, provided a naturally dangerous environment that enhanced the sequence's tension without requiring artificial obstacles. Cruise's performance of his own riding, weaving through moving traffic without the safety of closed roads for many shots, created a genuine risk that communicates through the screen to audiences accustomed to digitally enhanced action sequences. The sequence's choreography emphasizes spatial geography and environmental interaction, with Ethan using the roundabout's unique layout to evade pursuers rather than simply outrunning them in a straight line. The inclusion of actual Parisian drivers, many of whom were not informed of the filming schedule for certain shots, added an element of unpredictability that required crews to react to genuine hazards rather than pre-planned scenarios. The sequence's editing maintains spatial coherence throughout, allowing audiences to understand the geography of the chase and the relative positions of pursuers and pursued at all times. This clarity of geography represents a significant achievement in action filmmaking, as many contemporary blockbusters sacrifice spatial logic for the sake of rapid editing and visual spectacle. The motorcycle chase serves as the narrative culmination of the Paris sequence, bringing together the various plot threads that have accumulated since the film's opening in a single, sustained action set piece. The sequence's placement at the film's midpoint functions structurally to re-energize the narrative after the exposition-heavy first act, providing the kinetic payoff that audiences expect from the franchise. French critics particularly noted the audacity of filming at the Arc de Triomphe, with many commenting that the roundabout is challenging enough to navigate under normal conditions without the addition of a motorcycle chase. The sequence also advances character development, with Ethan's willingness to risk his life for the mission contrasted against Walker's more detached observation from the pursuit vehicle. The eventual failure of the chase, with the plutonium slipping beyond Ethan's reach, reinforces the film's theme that even heroic effort does not guarantee success, creating stakes that persist through the remainder of the narrative. The sequence's conclusion, with Ethan captured by local authorities, provides a natural break point that allows audiences to process the action before the narrative shifts toward the Solomon Lane extraction. The bathroom fight sequence in Paris has achieved iconic status within the action genre, representing a convergence of choreographic precision, character revelation, and unexpected cultural resonance through Cavill's now-famous arm reload gesture. The sequence's setting, a cramped bathroom with tiled surfaces and confined spaces, forces the combatants into close quarters that eliminate the possibility of the extended, open-space choreography that characterizes many action films. The decision to film the sequence with minimal cutting, allowing the performers to execute extended physical exchanges without editing intervention, creates a sense of continuous, unbroken violence that CGI-enhanced sequences cannot replicate. The choreography emphasizes realism over stylization, with the combatants showing exhaustion, taking real damage, and struggling to overcome opponents who are presented as genuine threats rather than disposable obstacles. Cavill's arm reload gesture, which he improvised on set to reset his character's physical state after firing his weapon, became an instant meme that transcended the film to achieve broader cultural recognition. The gesture's popularity demonstrates how small, character-specific details can resonate with audiences in ways that elaborate set pieces sometimes fail to achieve. The sequence's structure, moving from a contained confrontation to an explosive escape through the building's facade, follows a classic action escalation pattern while maintaining coherence through careful spatial geography. The involvement of both Ethan and Walker in the fight, forced to cooperate despite their growing antagonism, creates a dynamic where the audience is uncertain whether the alliance will hold through the confrontation. The sequence's brutality, with opponents suffering compound fractures and repeated blunt force trauma, establishes a level of violence that feels consequential rather than cartoonish. The death of the antagonist at Walker's hands, when capture and interrogation would have been Ethan's preference, crystallizes the fundamental difference between the two characters in a moment of irreversible action. The sequence's aftermath, with Ethan and Walker emerging bloodied but alive, establishes a temporary truce that the audience knows cannot last, creating anticipation for their eventual confrontation. Critics consistently cited the bathroom fight as one of the film's highlights, with several noting that the sequence alone justified the film's runtime. The sequence's success has influenced subsequent action films, with many attempting to replicate its combination of confined spaces, practical choreography, and character-revealing combat. The production's decision to build the bathroom set to exact specifications, allowing for the destruction required by the choreography while maintaining structural integrity for multiple takes, exemplifies the film's commitment to practical effects. The helicopter chase sequence represents the culmination of Tom Cruise's commitment to performing his own stunts, requiring the actor to become a licensed helicopter pilot capable of executing aerial combat maneuvers that professional stunt pilots would find challenging. Cruise's training for the sequence extended over years, beginning with basic helicopter instruction and progressing to advanced maneuvers that allowed him to perform the aerial dogfight without a safety pilot in many shots. The sequence's setting in the mountain valleys of New Zealand provided natural obstacles that enhanced the tension while also creating significant risks for a pilot of even Cruise's capability. The decision to film the sequence with multiple helicopters in close proximity, requiring coordinated flying that left minimal margin for error, demonstrated a level of risk tolerance that distinguishes the Mission Impossible franchise from any other action series. The sequence's choreography follows a clear spatial logic, with the pursuing helicopter navigating canyon walls and mountain peaks, while the transport helicopter carrying the nuclear device attempts to escape. The use of the helicopter's weapons systems, with crews firing rockets and operating the aircraft simultaneously, required the development of specialized camera mounts that could capture the action without interfering with the pilot's controls. The sequence's climax, with Ethan intentionally crashing his helicopter to disable the transport aircraft, represents a moment of physical sacrifice that echoes the character's willingness to risk everything for mission success. The practical execution of the crash sequence, with crews remaining in the aircraft during the impact, required the construction of specialized safety systems that could protect the performer while creating the appearance of a catastrophic failure. The sequence's integration with the ground-based action occurring simultaneously at the medical camp creates parallel narratives that maintain tension across multiple fronts during the film's final act. Critics praised the helicopter chase as one of the most impressive aerial sequences ever filmed, with many noting that Cruise's piloting created a level of authenticity that digital effects cannot achieve. The sequence's technical achievement is enhanced by the cinematography, which captures the helicopters from angles that emphasize their vulnerability within the mountain environment while maintaining spatial clarity throughout the pursuit. The sequence's placement at the film's climax ensures that the action escalates rather than peaks prematurely, with the aerial combat representing a significant escalation from the ground-based action that precedes it. The production's commitment to practical aerial photography, with cameras mounted on both helicopters and flown alongside by additional aircraft, created a visual richness that distinguishes the sequence from CGI-dominated aerial battles. The helicopter chase sequence has been cited by industry professionals as a benchmark for practical action filmmaking, demonstrating that the commitment to real stunts can achieve results that digital effects cannot replicate. The film's treatment of Julia, Ethan's ex-wife portrayed by Michelle Monaghan, represents the franchise's most significant engagement with its own continuity, providing closure to a storyline that began 12 years earlier in Mission Impossible 3. Monaghan's return was motivated by Cruise's desire to resolve the character's narrative rather than leaving her fate ambiguous, responding to years of questions from fans about what happened to Julia after her protection was secured. The film's revelation that Julia has remarried and lives a quiet life as a medical professional represents a realistic outcome for a character who was removed from the franchise to protect her from the dangers of Ethan's profession. The decision to place Julia at the Kashmir medical camp, where the apostles plan to detonate their nuclear devices, creates an organic connection between the personal and professional stakes of the film's climax. Ethan's discovery that Julia is present at the camp forces him to confront the consequences of his life choices in a more immediate way than the abstract threat of nuclear contamination. The quiet conversation between Ethan and Julia at the camp's helipad represents the film's emotional climax, providing a moment of genuine human connection that contrasts sharply with the spectacular action surrounding it. Julia's statement that Ethan gave her a life worth living, despite the danger and eventual dissolution of their marriage, validates the choices that have defined Ethan's character across the franchise. This validation is thematically crucial, as it counters the narrative that Ethan's commitment to his work represents a failure to prioritize the people he loves. The scene's emotional power derives from its restraint, with Monaghan and Cruise playing the moment with understated vulnerability rather than the heightened emotion that lesser films might employ. The resolution of Ethan and Julia's relationship allows the franchise to move forward without the lingering question of whether Ethan might someday return to a normal life, establishing his continued commitment to the IMF as a choice rather than a failure. The scene's placement immediately before the final action sequence creates an emotional foundation that makes the subsequent stunts feel meaningful rather than merely spectacular. Julia's survival through the film's events, and her apparent acceptance of Ethan's continued dangerous work, provides closure that respects the character's history while allowing the franchise to continue exploring Ethan's relationships with other characters. The film's handling of Julia demonstrates the value of long-term franchise continuity, rewarding audience investment in characters across multiple installments with meaningful emotional payoffs. This approach to continuity has become a hallmark of the Mission Impossible franchise under McQuarrie's direction, distinguishing it from series that treat each installment as a standalone adventure requiring minimal knowledge of previous films. The character of Luther Stickle, portrayed by Ving Rhames, receives his most substantial role in the franchise since the original film, reflecting the character's status as Ethan's most trusted confidant and the only other character to appear in all 6 installments. Rames's performance throughout the film emphasizes Luther's role as the team's moral compass, frequently questioning Ethan's choices while ultimately supporting them with unwavering loyalty. The film's opening mission in Berlin establishes Luther's importance to Ethan, with the choice to save his life rather than secure the plutonium cores setting the entire narrative in motion. Luther's technical expertise remains crucial to the team's operations, but the film expands his role to include tactical planning and field operations that previous installments reserved for younger characters. The character's relationship with Benji Dunn, played by Simon Pegg, has developed into a genuine friendship across the franchise, with the 2 supporting characters sharing significant screen time that emphasizes their importance beyond their functional roles. Luther's skepticism toward August Walker, voiced early in the film before Walker's betrayal is confirmed, positions the character as a surrogate for the audience's suspicions while also demonstrating his protective instincts toward Ethan. The film's London sequence, where Luther and Benji operate the deception that exposes Walker as John Lark, represents the culmination of their development from supporting technicians to capable field agents. Luther's reaction to Alan Hunley's death, mourning a character who had been adversarial toward the IMF team in previous installments, demonstrates the character's capacity for recognizing genuine character growth in others. The character's presence throughout the film's most dangerous sequences, rather than being relegated to a remote support role, emphasizes his commitment to the team and his willingness to share the risks that Ethan routinely accepts. Rames's delivery of Luther's lines carries the weight of his history with the franchise, creating moments where a simple exchange carries meaning derived from the character's long relationship with Ethan and the audience. The film's treatment of Luther as a physically capable operator, despite the character's age and previous positioning as primarily technical support, reflects the franchise's commitment to showing rather than telling the capabilities of its supporting cast. Luther's survival through the film's events, and his continued role in the final scene, positions the character to continue as Ethan's anchor in future installments. The character's importance to the franchise has grown across the series, with each film finding new dimensions to explore in his relationship with Ethan. Critics noted that Luther's expanded role represented an acknowledgement of Rames's contributions to the franchise and a recognition that audiences value the continuity his character provides. Benji Dunn's evolution from comic relief in Mission Impossible 3 to a competent field agent capable of critical operations represents one of the franchise's most successful character arcs, with Fallout presenting Benji at his most capable while retaining the humor that made him memorable. Simon Pegg's performance balances the character's anxiety and self-doubt with moments of genuine heroism, creating a character whose fears make his courage more meaningful than if he approached danger without concern. Benji's technical expertise remains central to the team's operations, but the film places him in physical situations that previous installments would have reserved for Ethan or Luther. The character's participation in the London deception sequence, where he must physically confront the apostles while maintaining his cover, represents a significant escalation of his role in the franchise. Benji's relationship with Luther has developed into a genuine partnership, with the two characters supporting each other through the film's challenges while maintaining the humorous dynamic that audiences enjoy. The character's fear of heights, established in Rogue Nation, is referenced during the Halo jump sequence, creating continuity that rewards attentive viewers while providing a moment of levity before the sequence's tension escalates. Benji's interactions with Ilsa Faust demonstrate the character's growth in confidence, treating her as a colleague rather than being intimidated by her capabilities as he might have been in earlier films. The character's technical improvisation during the London sequence, using projection mapping to create convincing illusions, showcases his expertise while advancing the plot in a manner consistent with the franchise's tradition of technological problem-solving. Benji's reaction to Alan Hunley's death, showing genuine grief for a character who had previously dismissed him, demonstrates the emotional depth that Pegg brings to what could be a purely comic role. The film's use of Benji for exposition has diminished across the franchise, with the character now integrated into action sequences rather than serving primarily as a source of information for the audience. Benji's survival through increasingly dangerous situations has become a running theme across the franchise, with each film finding new ways to place the character at risk while ensuring his continued availability for future installments. The character's friendship with Ethan, while less explicitly explored than Luther's, provides a different dynamic that emphasizes Ethan's protective instincts toward less experienced team members. Critics have noted that Benji's evolution across the franchise represents one of the series' greatest achievements, transforming a potentially disposable character into an essential member of the ensemble. The character's continued presence in the franchise, along with Luther and Ilsa, establishes a core team that audiences have invested in across multiple films, creating stakes that extend beyond Ethan's personal survival. The film's exploration of Ethan's moral code, specifically his refusal to sacrifice innocent lives even when doing so would ensure mission success, represents the franchise's most explicit engagement with the ethical dimensions of espionage work. This code is tested throughout the film, beginning with the Berlin mission where Ethan chooses Luther's life over mission success, and continuing through the Solomon Lane extraction where Ethan must weigh the consequences of releasing a terrorist against the certainty of nuclear detonation. The film presents Ethan's moral framework not as naive idealism, but as a conscious choice that defines his identity as an operative and a human being. August Walker's opposing philosophy, that hard choices require accepting casualties, is presented with sufficient logic to challenge Ethan's position without being endorsed by the film's narrative outcome. The film's resolution, in which Ethan succeeds through his refusal to compromise, suggests that the narrative is structured to validate his approach rather than question it. However, the cost of Ethan's choices is acknowledged throughout the film, with characters dying and missions failing because of his insistence on preserving every life. The film's title, Fallout, refers in part to the consequences of Ethan's choices, acknowledging that his moral code creates problems even as it ultimately proves justified. Ethan's willingness to risk nuclear catastrophe rather than allow the death of a single innocent person represents an extreme position that the film treats as heroic rather than reckless. This framing reflects the franchise's broader commitment to presenting Ethan as a fundamentally heroic figure, even as the complexity of his missions increases across installments. The film's exploration of moral choice extends to supporting characters, with Ilsa, Luther, and even the White Widow forced to make decisions that test their own ethical frameworks. The contrast between Ethan's moral consistency and the situational ethics of other characters creates dramatic tension that enriches the action sequences with thematic weight. The film's climax, where Ethan offers Walker a chance to survive even after Walker's betrayal, represents the ultimate expression of his moral code, refusing to abandon his principles even when facing a man who has abandoned all principles. This consistency positions Ethan as a figure of moral certainty in a world of espionage that typically rewards moral flexibility, creating a character who stands apart from the cynical tradition of spy fiction. The film's treatment of moral choice has been cited by critics as a key factor in its critical success, distinguishing it from action films that treat such considerations as obstacles to be overcome rather than themes to be explored. The film's handling of the mask gimmick, a franchise staple since Brian De Palma's original, demonstrates McQuarrie's ability to honor series traditions while subverting audience expectations about their narrative function. The mask technology is introduced early in the film, establishing its continued existence within the franchise's world without drawing unnecessary attention to its implausibility. The film's first major mask sequence, where Ethan impersonates the man believed to be John Lark, uses the technology for its traditional purpose of infiltration while creating narrative complications through Ilsa's unexpected intervention. The London sequence represents the film's most sophisticated use of the mask technology, employing it not to deceive the villains, but to expose August Walker's true identity to the CIA. This subversion of the mask's typical function, using it for revelation rather than deception, demonstrates McQuarrie's willingness to innovate within the franchise's established parameters. The sequence's structure, revealing that Ethan was impersonating Lane rather than Walker as audiences had been led to believe, creates a twist that rewards attentive viewing while maintaining coherence with the film's established logic. The mask reveals placement at a moment of maximum narrative tension, with the IMF team seemingly defeated and Walker ascending to control, maximizes its emotional impact while serving the film's broader structural goals. The practical execution of the mask sequences, requiring careful coordination of prosthetics and performance, demonstrates the production's commitment to practical effects even for elements that could be accomplished digitally. The film's use of masks is notable for its restraint, with the technology employed only when narratively necessary rather than as a gimmick to fill running time. The mask sequences also serve to reinforce the film's thematic exploration of identity, particularly through the contrast between Ethan and Walker, two operatives who use similar tools for fundamentally different purposes. The revelation that Walker has been operating without a mask, presenting his true self throughout the film while being suspected of wearing a disguise, adds another layer to the film's meditation on authenticity and deception. The mask technology's limitations are acknowledged within the narrative, with characters noting the time required for application and the risks of detection, maintaining the plausibility that allows audiences to accept the franchise's more fantastic elements. The film's treatment of masks has influenced subsequent installments, with Dead Reckoning Part 1 and The Final Reckoning continuing to find innovative uses for the technology while respecting the traditions established across the franchise. Critics have noted that the mask sequences in Fallout represent the franchise's most sophisticated use of the technology, employing it for narrative complexity rather than simple plot convenience. The film's structural complexity, weaving multiple plot threads across 3 distinct locations while maintaining character development and thematic coherence, represents a significant achievement in action screenwriting that rewards repeated viewing. The narrative's division into Berlin, Paris, London, and Kashmir sections creates clear geographical and structural divisions that help audiences navigate the complex plot without requiring excessive exposition. The film's use of the plutonium cores as a unifying MacGuffin ensures that all plot threads ultimately converge on a single objective, maintaining narrative focus even as the complications multiply. The Solomon Lane extraction sequence functions as the narrative's fulcrum, transforming the film's central conflict from recovering plutonium to managing the consequences of releasing a known terrorist. The introduction of the Julia threat in the film's final act adds personal stakes that elevate the narrative beyond the standard save-the-world formula, creating investment in outcomes beyond the prevention of nuclear catastrophe. The film's multiple twists, including Walker's identity as John Lark, the deception in the London sequence, and the presence of Julia in Kashmir, are spaced throughout the narrative to maintain audience engagement without overwhelming comprehension. The film's runtime of 147 minutes allows for the development of these narrative threads without the compression that would sacrifice character development or thematic exploration. The complexity of the plot has been cited by some critics as a potential barrier to entry for casual viewers, with the film rewarding familiarity with previous installments and attention to narrative details. However, this complexity also provides the film with replay value, as viewers discover new layers of narrative construction on subsequent viewings. The film's screenwriting, credited to McQuarrie based on a story developed with the franchise's creative team, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how action and narrative can reinforce each other when properly integrated. The balance between the Paris and London sequences, with the former emphasizing action and the latter emphasizing deception, provides variety that prevents the narrative from becoming monotonous despite its extended runtime. The film's conclusion, resolving both the immediate threat of nuclear detonation and the longer-term character arcs of Ethan and Julia, provides closure while leaving sufficient threads for future installments to explore. The structural complexity of Fallout has been cited by critics as evidence of the franchise's maturation, demonstrating that action films can engage audiences intellectually while delivering spectacular entertainment. The film's success has influenced the structure of subsequent installments, with Dead Reckoning Part 1 and The Final Reckoning employing similarly complex narrative architectures. The film's cinematography, executed by Rob Hardy, represents a significant evolution in the visual language of the franchise, employing camera movement and lighting to enhance narrative tension while maintaining the clarity required for complex action sequences. Hardy's use of anamorphic lenses creates the widescreen compositions that have become characteristic of the franchise, while allowing for the shallow depth of field that emphasizes character reactions during dialogue sequences. The film's nighttime photography in Paris, capturing the city's lights and architecture while maintaining visibility for action sequences, required extensive lighting setups that Hardy designed to appear naturalistic while providing sufficient exposure for high-speed cinematography. The use of counterplunge camera angles, shooting upward at characters to emphasize their physical presence, was employed strategically throughout the film to magnify August Walker's imposing stature while also elevating Ethan during moments of heroism. Hardy's approach to action cinematography emphasizes long takes that allow audiences to process the geography of sequences rather than the rapid editing that obscures spatial relationships in many action films. The helicopter chase sequence required the development of specialized camera mounting systems that could capture the action from multiple angles while maintaining safety for the pilots and crew. Hardy's use of color grading, with cool blues and greens dominating the London sequences contrasting with warmer tones in the Kashmir finale, creates visual distinction between the film's geographical sections without announcing itself as a stylistic choice. The film's incorporation of IMAX cameras for select sequences, including the halo jump and helicopter chase, provided expanded aspect ratios that enhanced the immersive quality of the film's most spectacular moments. Hardy's collaboration with McQuarrie, which continued on subsequent installments, created a visual consistency that distinguishes the McQuarrie-directed films from earlier entries in the franchise. The cinematographer's ability to maintain visual clarity during complex action sequences, allowing audiences to track character positions and environmental obstacles, represents the foundation upon which the film's practical stunt work could succeed. Hardy's use of handheld camera during action sequences creates a sense of immediacy that CGI-heavy productions cannot replicate, placing audiences within the chaos rather than observing it from a remove. The film's quieter moments, particularly the conversation between Ethan and Julia at the Kashmir medical camp, are shot with a simplicity that allows the performances to carry emotional weight without visual distraction. Hardy's work on Fallout received recognition from critics and industry professionals, establishing him as one of the most accomplished cinematographers working in action cinema. The film's visual achievements have influenced subsequent action films, demonstrating that spectacular action need not sacrifice the visual sophistication expected of prestige cinema. The film's editing, supervised by Eddie Hamilton, achieves the difficult balance of maintaining momentum across the film's extended runtime while providing audiences with sufficient spatial information to follow complex action sequences. Hamilton's approach to action editing prioritizes spatial coherence, ensuring that each cut provides information about character positions and environmental obstacles rather than simply creating rhythmic excitement. The Paris motorcycle chase sequence required the assembly of footage from multiple cameras mounted on vehicles, buildings, and aerial platforms, with Hamilton's editorial choices creating a coherent narrative of pursuit despite the multiplicity of perspectives. The bathroom fight sequences editing, employing longer takes than typical action editing while maintaining pace through precise cut placement, demonstrates Hamilton's understanding of how editorial rhythm can enhance rather than obscure choreography. The film's use of cross-cutting between the helicopter chase and ground-based action at the medical camp creates parallel narratives that maintain tension across multiple fronts during the film's extended climax. Hamilton's editorial choices during dialogue sequences, employing reaction shots that allow audiences to read character responses to information, enhance the narrative complexity of scenes that could become exposition-heavy with less skilled editing. The film's pacing, accelerating from the methodical opening to the sustained action of the final hour, required editorial judgment that Hamilton developed through extensive collaboration with McQuarrie during post-production. The integration of the broken ankle footage, which occurred during the filming of the rooftop jump sequence in London, required editorial creativity to incorporate the moment of genuine injury without disrupting the sequence's flow. Hamilton's work on the mask reveal sequences, particularly the London deception, required precise timing to ensure that the revelation of Ethan's impersonation occurred at the moment of maximum narrative impact. The film's transition between locations, moving from Paris to London to Kashmir, employs editorial bridges that maintain narrative momentum while providing audiences with sufficient orientation to new environments. Hamilton's collaboration with sound designer James Mather ensured that the film's sonic landscape complemented the editorial rhythm, creating a complete sensory experience that enhanced the impact of both action and dialogue sequences. The editor's ability to shape performances through cut selection, choosing the takes that best serve character moments while maintaining continuity, contributed significantly to the film's critical success. Hamilton's work on Fallout earned recognition from the American cinema editors, establishing him as one of the most respected editors working in action cinema. The film's editorial achievements have influenced subsequent installments in the franchise, with Dead Reckoning Part 1 and The Final Reckoning continuing Hamilton's approach to balancing spectacle with narrative clarity. The film's sound design, supervised by James Mather, creates an immersive sonic environment that enhances the impact of action sequences while maintaining clarity for dialogue and narrative information. The Halo jump sequence required the creation of a soundscape that communicated the physical experience of freefall, with wind noise building to overwhelming intensity before cutting to silence during the opening of the parachute. The bathroom fight sequence's sound design emphasizes the physical impact of each blow, with bone fractures and blunt force trauma rendered with visceral clarity that enhances the sequence's brutality. The motorcycle chase through Paris incorporates the specific sounds of the city's traffic and architecture, grounding the sequence in its location while maintaining the spatial information audiences need to follow the action. The helicopter chase sequence required the recording of actual helicopter sounds during flight, with Mather's team capturing the specific acoustic signatures of the aircraft used in the production. The film's use of silence, particularly during moments of tension before action sequences, demonstrates Mather's understanding that sonic restraint can be as effective as sonic excess in creating audience engagement. The score composed by Lorne Balfe, integrating themes established in Rogue Nation while introducing new material for Walker and the film's emotional moments, works in concert with the sound design to create a cohesive sonic identity. The film's dialogue clarity, maintained even during the most complex action sequences, ensures that audiences can follow the narrative without requiring subtitles or post-viewing clarification. The sound design for the mask reveal sequences employs subtle shifts in audio texture that prepare audiences for revelations without telegraphing them too obviously. Mather's use of directional sound, with audio cues placed in the surround channels to indicate off-screen threats, creates a three-dimensional sonic environment that enhances the film's immersive quality. The integration of practical sound effects, recorded during the filming of stunts, with design sounds for elements that could not be captured live required extensive work from Mather's team during post-production. The film's sonic landscape contributes significantly to its emotional impact, with the conversation between Ethan and Julia scored with a restraint that allows the performances to carry the scene's weight. Mather's collaboration with Hamilton on the film's editorial rhythm ensured that sound and picture worked together to create the pacing that critics praised. The sound design of Fallout has been cited by industry professionals as a benchmark for action cinema, demonstrating that sonic sophistication can coexist with the demands of spectacular entertainment. The film's production design, supervised by Peter Wenham, creates environments that serve narrative function while maintaining the visual sophistication expected of the franchise. The Paris locations, including the nightclub where the White Widow conducts business and the sewers where Ethan's team plans their operation, were selected for their visual distinctiveness while being modified to serve the film's narrative requirements. The London sequence's deception operation, requiring the construction of a detailed replica of the CIA meeting location, demonstrates the production design team's ability to create environments that serve both narrative and technical functions. The Kashmir Medical Camp, built on location in New Zealand, required the construction of a functioning medical facility that could withstand the demands of the film's action sequences while appearing authentic to the region and situation. The production design for Solomon Lane's extraction sequence, requiring the recreation of a Parisian police facility with the security systems required for the narrative, balanced authenticity with the technical requirements of the action choreography. The film's use of existing locations, including the Arc de Triomphe and the Tate Modern in London, was integrated with constructed sets to create environments that serve the narrative while maintaining the authenticity of location shooting. Wenham's team was responsible for the design of the film's mask technology, creating prosthetics and application systems that could function within the practical demands of the production while maintaining the franchise's established visual language. The design of the plutonium cores, serving as the film's central MacGuffin, required creating objects that appeared sufficiently threatening to justify the narrative stakes while remaining visually distinctive. The production design for the film's vehicles, including the helicopters used in the final chase and the motorcycles used in the Paris sequence, required modifications that allowed for the camera mounting and stunt work required by the action choreography. The film's color palette, developed through collaboration between Wenham and cinematographer Hardy, created visual continuity across the film's multiple locations while allowing for distinct identities for each major sequence. The production design for the bathroom fight sequence, constructing a fully functional bathroom set that could be destroyed while maintaining safety for the performers, required engineering solutions that Wenham's team developed through extensive testing. The film's approach to production design has influenced subsequent installments, with Dead Reckoning Part 1 and The Final Reckoning continuing the emphasis on practical environments that serve both narrative and action requirements. Wenham's work on Fallout earned recognition from the Art Directors Guild, establishing the film's production design as a significant achievement within the action genre. The film's exploration of August Walker's psychology reveals a character whose nihilistic worldview stems from years of operating in black sites where moral compromise was not merely accepted but required, creating a philosophical adversary who genuinely believes Ethan's moral code represents a dangerous naivety that will ultimately cause more deaths than it prevents. Henry Cavill developed this backstory through extensive conversations with Christopher McQuarrie, establishing that Walker's hatred for Ethan derives not from personal animosity, but from a conviction that the IMF agent's methods are fundamentally irresponsible when measured against the scale of threats facing global security. The character's introduction at the CIA briefing, where he stands with military precision while the IMF team slouches in their chairs, visually establishes this philosophical divide before a single word of dialogue addresses their conflicting approaches to counterterrorism. Walker's willingness to kill the man believed to be John Lark without extracting intelligence represents not recklessness, but a calculated assessment that the risk of the man escaping outweighs any potential information he might provide under interrogation. This calculation, which Ethan finds abhorrent, reflects a worldview shaped by operations where capture was impossible and intelligence had to be gathered through means that left no living witnesses. The film's bathroom fight sequence, beyond its technical achievements, serves as a crucible where Walker's philosophy is demonstrated through action. He fights with lethal efficiency, killing opponents who could have been captured, while Ethan attempts to preserve lives even when doing so prolongs the confrontation and increases his own risk. Walker's decision to kill the IMF Secretary Hunley in London represents the culmination of his philosophy, eliminating a witness who could testify to his true identity without hesitation because the strategic value of silence outweighs any moral consideration about taking a colleague's life. The character's final confrontation with Ethan on the cliff edge forces a direct engagement between their competing worldviews, with Walker attempting to defeat Ethan physically while also proving that moral compromise is inevitable in their line of work. Walker's refusal of Ethan's offered hand, choosing death over accepting help from a man whose principles he considers dangerously naive, provides a final statement on his character that resonates with tragic irony. His commitment to his philosophy proves as absolute as Ethan's commitment to his own, making him a mirror rather than merely an antagonist. The film's decision to kill Walker rather than capture him reflects the narrative's acknowledgement that some philosophical conflicts cannot be resolved through dialogue or imprisonment, only through the elimination of one perspective. Cavill's performance throughout maintains a professional demeanor that makes Walker's eventual betrayal shocking to audiences who expected the character to remain an antagonist within the system rather than its corruption. The character's physical presence, emphasized through cinematography that frequently frames him as larger and more imposing than Ethan, creates a visual representation of the brute force approach he represents. Walker's relationship with Solomon Lane, revealed through subtle interactions during the extraction sequence, suggests a shared ideological foundation that transcends the transactional nature of their alliance. The film's treatment of Walker as a character who could have been the protagonist of a different narrative, one where his methods would be celebrated as necessary pragmatism, adds complexity to what might otherwise have been a conventional villain role. The film's approach to depicting intelligence operations draws upon extensive research into contemporary counterterrorism methods while maintaining the heightened reality expected of the franchise, creating a world that feels authentic without sacrificing the spectacular elements audiences anticipate. Christopher McQuarrie worked with former intelligence officers during the development process, incorporating their experiences into the film's depiction of how agencies like the CIA and IMF might actually operate when faced with threats requiring extraordinary measures. The film's portrayal of interagency conflict, with the CIA forcing a handler onto the IMF team, reflects the real-world tensions between intelligence organizations that often compete for resources and operational control while theoretically working toward common objectives. The depiction of the Apostles as a decentralized network of former Syndicate operatives who sell their services to the highest bidder mirrors the evolution of terrorist organizations in the post-9/11 era, where ideological motivations have increasingly given way to profit-driven models of operation. The film's use of safe houses, dead drops, and operational tradecraft adheres to established espionage traditions while updating them for the digital age, creating a world where physical security remains as important as cybersecurity, despite the technological sophistication of the characters. The Solomon Lane extraction sequence, requiring the IMF team to coordinate with local authorities while executing a plan that involves deception at multiple levels, demonstrates an understanding of how intelligence operations actually function when they must navigate the constraints of operating within allied nations. The film's depiction of surveillance technology, including facial recognition systems and satellite tracking, reflects contemporary capabilities while acknowledging their limitations through sequences where characters evade detection through practical means rather than technological countermeasures. The portrayal of the White Widow's criminal network, operating with the sophistication of a legitimate business while engaging in arms trafficking and hostage negotiations, reflects the reality of how modern criminal organizations have professionalized their operations to avoid detection and maintain profitability. The film's treatment of the IMF as an organization operating outside normal governmental oversight, accountable only to a secretary who can be killed without triggering institutional collapse, acknowledges the franchise's established mythology while grounding it in questions about accountability that resonate with contemporary political discourse. The depiction of August Walker's black site background, referenced through dialogue rather than shown explicitly, allows audiences to infer the nature of his previous operations without requiring the film to depict the kind of torture and extrajudicial killing that would compromise its heroic tone. The film's portrayal of MI6 through Ilsa Faust's character suggests an organization willing to sacrifice operatives for political advantage, reflecting the cynical view of intelligence agencies that has characterized the franchise since its inception. The research conducted for the film extended to the depiction of nuclear devices, with technical consultants ensuring that the plutonium cores and their potential for contamination were represented with sufficient accuracy to maintain credibility, while avoiding the presentation of information that could pose genuine security concerns. The film's portrayal of the Kashmir medical camp, including the humanitarian crisis that would result from nuclear contamination of regional water supplies, grounds the film's spectacular stakes in genuine geopolitical realities that give weight to Ethan's mission. This commitment to research-based authenticity, balanced against the franchise's established conventions, creates a world that feels sufficiently real to support the emotional investment required for the film's character-driven moments. The film's handling of the relationship between Ethan and Ilsa Faust represents a mature approach to male-female dynamics in action cinema, developing a partnership based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than the romantic tension that has characterized similar relationships in earlier installments. Rebecca Ferguson and Tom Cruise developed their characters' dynamic through extensive discussions about their shared history, establishing that the connection between Ethan and Ilsa transcends physical attraction to encompass a genuine understanding of the sacrifices their profession requires. Ilsa's introduction in Paris, emerging from the shadows to kill the man Ethan is pursuing, immediately establishes her as an equal participant in the narrative rather than a supporting character whose existence is defined by her relationship to the protagonist. The film's exploration of Ilsa's competing loyalties, torn between her personal connection to Ethan and her professional obligations to MI6, creates dramatic tension that enriches her character beyond the action sequences in which she participates. The decision to have Ilsa choose Ethan's side in the film's climactic confrontation, despite the personal cost to her career and safety, represents a conscious choice that demonstrates her agency rather than a narrative convenience that serves the protagonist's needs. Ilsa's combat sequences are choreographed to emphasize her technical proficiency and strategic thinking, presenting her as a character whose effectiveness derives from intelligence and training rather than the superhuman capabilities sometimes granted to female action characters. The film's avoidance of romantic resolution between Ethan and Ilsa, neither confirming nor denying the possibility of future development, allows their relationship to exist in a space of possibility that feels more authentic than either a forced romance or an explicit rejection would achieve. Ilsa's interactions with Benji and Luther demonstrate her integration into the IMF team, treating her as a colleague whose expertise is valued rather than an outsider whose presence requires explanation. The character's wardrobe and presentation throughout the film emphasize practicality and professionalism, avoiding the sexualization that has characterized female characters in earlier action cinema and in earlier installments of this franchise. Ilsa's backstory, referenced through her familiarity with Solomon Lane and her knowledge of MI6 operations that compromised her previous mission, provides depth that rewards audience investment without requiring extensive exposition that would interrupt the film's pacing. The character's survival through the film's events, unlike many female characters in action cinema who exist primarily to motivate male protagonists, positions her for continued development in subsequent installments where her relationship with Ethan can continue to evolve. Ilsa's moral complexity, demonstrated through her willingness to kill when necessary while maintaining principles that align with Ethan's, makes her a more interesting character than either a pure hero or antihero would be. The film's treatment of Ilsa reflects the franchise's broader evolution toward more sophisticated character work, recognizing that audiences respond to well-developed female characters whose narratives extend beyond their relationships to male protagonists. Ferguson's performance, building upon her work in Rogue Nation, brings a gravitas to Ilsa that makes her an essential element of the film's emotional landscape rather than a decorative addition to an already crowded cast. The film's thematic engagement with the concept of legacy operates across multiple levels, from the franchise's own history to the personal histories of its characters, creating a narrative that acknowledges the weight of past events while moving confidently toward future possibilities. The return of Julia after 12 years represents the franchise's most explicit acknowledgement of its own continuity, providing closure to a storyline that began in Mission Impossible 3 while establishing that Ethan's past will continue to shape his present regardless of how far he travels or how many missions he completes. The casting of Vanessa Kirby as the White Widow, daughter of Max from the original Mission Impossible, creates a connection to the franchise's 1996 beginning that rewards long-term viewers while introducing a new character who exists independently of her parentage. The The film's resolution of the Julia storyline allows Ethan to move forward without the burden of unresolved personal history, establishing that his commitment to the IMF is a choice rather than a default position resulting from failed relationships. The franchise's own legacy is acknowledged through the return of Ving Rhames as Luther Stickle, the only character besides Ethan to appear in every installment, whose presence provides continuity that grounds the film's spectacular elements in relationships that audiences have followed for more than 2 decades. The film's treatment of Solomon Lane, bringing back a villain from Rogue Nation rather than introducing an entirely new antagonist, demonstrates the franchise's willingness to develop characters across multiple installments rather than treating each film as a standalone adventure. The death of IMF Secretary Alan Hunley, a character introduced in Rogue Nation who evolved from antagonist to ally, represents the franchise's acknowledgement that supporting characters have narrative weight that can be leveraged for emotional impact when their stories conclude. The film's use of locations, returning to Paris, which served as a setting for the franchise's earliest installments while introducing Kashmir as a new environment, creates geographical continuity that mirrors the narrative's thematic concerns with past and future. The decision to have Ethan and his team operate independently of official oversight by the film's conclusion, having proven their value while the institutions they serve are shown to be compromised, suggests a future where the IMF exists outside the systems that have constrained it throughout the franchise. The film's closing scenes, showing the team together after their victory, reinforce the idea that the franchise's legacy is carried not by institutions, but by the relationships between characters who have chosen to continue working together despite the personal costs. Christopher McQuarrie's return as director, the first in franchise history, represents a metatextual acknowledgement that continuity of creative vision has value, establishing a legacy of filmmaking that extends beyond the on-screen narrative. The film's box office success, surpassing all previous installments, demonstrated that the franchise's legacy had value to audiences who responded to the continuity of characters and creative personnel across multiple films. The film's critical reception, widely acknowledged as the franchise's best, established a legacy of quality that subsequent installments would be measured against, creating expectations that the series would continue to evolve rather than coast on established goodwill. This multi-layered engagement with legacy transforms what could have been a conventional action sequel into a meditation on how the past shapes the present, rewarding audiences who have followed the franchise while remaining accessible to viewers experiencing these characters for the first time. The film's approach to depicting violence distinguishes it from both the sanitized action of PG-13 blockbusters and the gratuitous gore of R-rated alternatives, presenting physical conflict with a realism that emphasizes consequence without sacrificing the spectacular elements audiences expect. The bathroom fight sequence exemplifies this approach, showing combatants who take genuine damage that affects their performance throughout subsequent scenes, with bruises and injuries visible on characters for the remainder of the film. The decision to include the footage of Tom Cruise breaking his ankle during the rooftop jump sequence, using the take where the injury occurred in the final film, represents an unprecedented commitment to depicting the genuine physical toll that these stunts exact on performers. The film's depiction of gun violence emphasizes accuracy over volume, with characters firing weapons only when necessary and the consequences of gunshot wounds shown to be immediate and debilitating rather than survivable through sheer willpower.